When did you first hear the word Palantir? For a lot of people, it evokes imagery of a shadowy tech behemoth lurking in the darkness of data analytics, national security, and surveillance. Many people can't even define what Palantir does. They just know it's powerful and feels unsettling to think about. Most Silicon Valley stories end with an app download or subscription. This one doesn't. Follow Palantir far enough and you land inside military command centers, forecasting systems, and software that's quietly influencing how states decide who is protected, who is watched, and who is targeted. But this conversation isn't just about Palantir. It's also about companies like Anduril, SpaceX, and Starshield, and about what happens when private tech firms begin building the infrastructure of modern war before governments fully understand the consequences. Today's guest is Andrew Iliadis, a media scholar and associate professor at Temple University whose work examines the collision of big tech, surveillance, autonomous defense, and contemporary warfare.
Think about what it means for all the people you know, all your associates. It's being part of a network where everything has suspicion cast upon it. There have been reports where the police were sent somewhere because the predictive policing model said that there might be a crime. Of course, there wasn't a crime. They went looking for examples of a crime. And so the more and more that you get sent somewhere, the more and more that will feed back into action and kind of create a hotspot where there maybe wasn't a hotspot, right?
Yeah.
And you start getting things like profiling, etc. It also creates these feedback loops for neighborhoods and communities and groups of people where that can just make them a criminal.
Yeah. His forthcoming book, Autonomous Defense, explores how private technology companies are not just supplying governments, but actively shaping how wars are planned, fought, and justified. Andrew's research goes beyond commentary. Along with his co-author, he dissected 155 Palantir patents and thousands of pages of internal technical documents to understand what these systems are truly designed to do. In this episode, we trace how 9/11 transformed military innovation, how cloud computing and venture capital fused with defense power, and why startups now arrived with finished weapons in hand. We also dig into predictive policing, ontology, AI-driven kill chains, and what scares Andrew most about where warfare is headed next. Because once prediction turns into policy, the real question isn't what this technology does, it's who gets to decide. Let's get into it. So we were talking before we started recording about how I came across your name, and I was searching around for Palantir. Your book came up with autonomous defense, and that kind of connected the dots, which is why we're sitting across from each other today. I'm curious. I think this would be a good place to start. Do you remember the first time you heard the name Palantir? How did that come into your life?
Yeah, probably the first time I heard about Palantir, I was maybe a grad student at Purdue University. I had been doing some work on data science, information science, and about data interoperability. And everyone kind of mentioned on social media this company called Palantir, and they always had this sort of ominous sounding tone to them. And as you know, the name comes from Lord of the Rings. It's this crystal ball that can see into the future. So I was
Palantiri, right?
The Palantir,
yeah.
So I was like, who's this company? What are they about? And just started doing a bit of research about them when I was a grad student.
It is it's kind of a double-edged sword because I understand being a troll. I don't troll myself, but when a big tech founder names their company after something extremely dark from Lord of the Rings, the seer of the future, bullshit, chaos, the end of the world, I get why someone would name their company after something like that. But on the other hand, if you're not being a troll, to me it seems are you trying to tap into something, tell the future with your name, kind of slap your dick down on the table and be yeah, we're Palantir. This is actually what we're going for. We're trying to, control everything that goes on, be those forecasters, all seers, in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I think Peter Thiel's just a really big Tolkien fan. Several other companies that he's either co-founded or invested in are also named after Lord of the Rings terms.
Okay.
Yeah, some of his investment firms. So I think whether it's the good guys or bad guys in the book, he just loves some of the names from that book, and so he's used it for several endeavors.
So how do you go from being introduced to Palantir and hearing it spoken about to wanting to study the intersection of big tech and warfare, because to undertake a book is a gigantic feat. It's a, multi-year long process. What drew you to want to become engulfed in that?
Well, I've always been interested in data interoperability, data systems. Ontology is kind of like the buzzword that they use in computer science to describe those types of processes. And really, I've also been pretty political in my life, kind of politically active. One of my heroes is Ralph Nader, if anybody knows that name and what he's done to help for fight for consumer rights and consumer advocacy, things like that. And so part of me was just like, how can I take some of the skills that I know about data science, about data interoperability, and apply that to some companies out there that are maybe doing some questionable things, maybe not? And can I produce research that can help lawmakers, journalists, academics by providing evidence about, these companies' operations? And so that's what I've been trying to do with this Palantir research is like, let me get some capital E evidence of some of the things that they've been doing, put it out there for public consumption, and then whoever wants to use it can in their reporting or things like that.
Yeah, I think that is really important because when you hear about autonomous defense or AI weapons or just the name Palantir, at least to me as an outside non-expert observer, it carries this dark, mysterious weight to it. And there's not a lot of factual evidence behind those emotions other than, like, for me, like from a personal standpoint, other than the one-off videos that I'll watch about Palantir on a YouTube channel or like a video essay documentary. So, and like I'll take it in, but I think it's really important to have people like yourself that are putting meaning to whatever feelings you're having about a company like Palantir. And we'll get into other companies too today, like Anduril, SpaceX. But it is important to have those facts because as I'm preparing for this episode, it's coloring the facts that you're presenting color the perception. And I'm like, oh, like, yes, there's a lot of weird shit going on in the world with autonomous defense, but like also I don't have it nearly as closely as I thought from a factual standpoint.
Yeah, and you're the second podcaster, first one that I'm doing an interview with, but somebody sent me another podcaster who did like a 2.5 hour video essay about autonomous defense, and they actually cited one of our papers and like quoted a bit of it, and I'm like, oh, so this is cool. We're feeding into the podcast sphere as well, learning about these companies.
I think I probably watched that. I watched like 5 video essays,
Okay.
in addition to going over the seer and the scene, which we'll throw up on the screen for people to check out, the Palantir papers, which you were also a co-author on both of those.
Yeah.
But yeah, I forget the name of the video essay, but I searched your name in YouTube just to see what else was out there in addition to the talks I've seen, and that came up with your source listed in it
Oh, I see. Okay.
amongst other. So it's getting out there. It's
Yeah,
it's getting
slowly,
into the
slowly.
video essay landscape. Um, how did the autonomous defense sector emerge? I want to take a step back and like really get into the roots of autonomous defense. Where do you see the roots of that emerging from?
So it's a long story, but I'm going to try to keep it relatively short. Silicon Valley has always been involved in the defense sector, right? Like World War
Mhm.
II, you had all sorts of companies that were providing weapons and defense technologies for the United States government. What kind of changed, I guess, in the 80s, 90s, and then especially with the rise of search engines and social media, is that Silicon Valley kind of turned its back to defense, right? It started focusing on things like search engines. Facebook emerged, right, in the early 2000s. And so what you've seen lately, I would say in the past, I don't know, maybe 20 years, is Silicon Valley once again turning back to doing defense work. And the companies that have been primarily involved in that are companies like Palantir, Anduril, SpaceX, but there's a ton of them right now. We can talk more about this later, but there's a group called the Silicon Valley Defense Group, and they're basically kind of this nonprofit that serves as a liaison between investment firms and startups. And they released something called the NatSec 100, National Security 100, which is basically the top 100 startup companies focusing on defense technologies in California. So it's not just these three firms. There's a lot of firms out there doing this type of work. I guess like the main thing I'll say that makes the autonomous defense sector different from the old defense sector, often you'll hear those firms. These are firms like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. You'll hear them referred to as the defense primes, right? They call them. So the way that the autonomous defense industry is different from the old defense primes is that typically, that old style, what would happen is the United States government would say, hey, we have all these contracts, we need these weapons built. Who's going to bid on them? And then a group of companies would bid on them. Lockheed Martin would win, and then it would take them several years to like produce jets or whatever it is that they're making. The way autonomous defense is different is that what companies like Anduril do, functioning more like a startup, is they'll produce a lot of products already that they have. So they'll already have a lot of products ready to go. And then they go and try to shop them to the government and say, hey, you need to buy this thing. We have these tools. And the reason they're able to do that is because they've already received large sums from venture capital, private equity, investment firms. We can spend time talking about some of those too, to the point where they've already valued at billions and billions and billions of dollars. They've already made all these products, and now their job is to try to convince the government and other people to buy them.
Yeah. So a lot of directions we could go there. The nonprofit, I might just be like dumb when it comes to all this stuff, but why would you need a nonprofit to connect Silicon Valley and the government? Couldn't the government or Silicon Valley just pick up the phone and be like, hey, we've got this thing, this new autonomous drone. Do you guys want to buy it? And then the DoD goes, yeah, sure, give us 1,000. Like, what does the nonprofit do in that sense?
You would think it would be easy, but government is a very slow-moving thing that's very resistant to change. And so companies like Palantir, Anduril, et cetera, and I should include other companies like Shield AI, not to just repeat the same three, they know this, and they know that part of their job is to kind of change hearts and minds inside the Pentagon, inside the defense industry, in government, to try to convince them that they need these types of technologies. Yes, interpersonal relationships help. There's it's kind of a revolving door from people who've worked in industry that go into government and vice versa. But partly the way that they do it successfully is by setting up these kind of like liaison groups. So the Silicon Valley Defense Group, so that's connecting investors to startup companies in the Valley. There's another group called the Hill and the Valley Forum, meaning Capitol Hill, Silicon Valley. And that's the one where they invite politicians, Democrats, Republicans. Cory Booker's been there. And they also invite tech CEOs. So like Alex Karp from Palantir was there. And so they've got these two sort of nonprofits, one trying to build the connect founders to the investment opportunities, and the other to connect politicians. And that's where they wine and dine each other. That's where they have cheese on platters.
I was going to say, it sounds like the nonprofits are providing a space for Silicon Valley CEOs like Alex Karp to drink too much wine with the guy from government, and then they cross paths, and then there's a bunch of other people in the room, and things happen, and then they wake up with a blurry memory the next day, and Alex Karp's like, oh yeah, I got this senator's number in my phone, like let me talk to him about this deal.
Yeah. And I'm an academic. We go to academic conferences. We do the same thing, networking, finding new job opportunities, all that kind of stuff.
It's funny that like no matter what industry you're in, like how if it's the bowling federation or autonomous defense, everyone has these things where they're like, all right, we're just gonna like put a bunch of people in a room and make business connections and just add a shit ton of alcohol and food to that.
It's a mixer. It's a mixer. Like,
we'll just booze it up.
Hey guys, you're about to hear a lot of scary things in this episode. Predictive policing, battlefields filled with autonomous AI weapons, and Silicon Valley decision-making moving so fast it turns democracy into a suggestion. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but where's the but? There is no but. We're completely The world will almost certainly end in a full-scale nuclear holocaust sparked by an accident, an algorithm, or some guy in a Patagonia vest clicking deploy way too confidently. However, if you'd like a nice distraction while the warm bath of the nuclear blast washes over you, subscribe to The Zach Show 2.0 at thezachshow.supercast.com. Subscribers get early access to every episode of The Zach Show, bonus episodes, the chance to be featured on the show, and other premium content to help you emotionally process the collapse of modern civilization. That's thezachshow.supercast.com. Everything you need to be spiritually prepared for the sweet, sweet radioactive abyss. Picture it. A glass of whiskey, a pack of cigarettes, a pair of AirPods, and the Zach Show 2.0 playing calmly in your ears as the shockwave sweeps us gently into the void. I hope it doesn't happen, because that would suck balls. But it never hurts to be prepared. That's thezachshow.supercast.com. All right, where were we?
I want to go back to the early 2000s, because you mentioned the old primes like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. It seems like 9/11 was a pivotal moment when things started to switch into the landscape that it is now for autonomous defense. What made 9/11, the Twin Towers attack, like such a huge driver of shit starting to just change across that industry?
Well, so one of the big failures on the part of the government from 9/11 was the failure to share information between different departments. If you read the report, that's like considered one of the key moments where they missed. There were a bunch of things happening that they missed, and so the CIA, the Pentagon, and the government at the time basically released directives saying our primary goal is to connect all the data that we have in these different government departments, because we missed patterns and connections and maybe ways that we could have prevented this thing from happening. And so one of the ways that they did that, try not to get too far down the rabbit hole, is the CIA has an investment arm called In-Q-Tel. And what they did at the time is they basically invest in startup companies, tech companies. And they invested in a small company called Palantir in 2003. And so Palantir really came out of that 9/11 ethos of there's a need to share data, connect data from different disparate databases. And they were born out of 9/11, out of CIA-backed funding and those types of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 9/11 was a big moment for realizing the need for centralized databases. Like a lot of the ways in which things change. Like you said, the CIA has some information, FBI, NSA, all over the place. After 9/11, they were like, yeah, we fucked up. Like, we should start sharing everything in one big pot.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Although like Centralize implies that it might be in one location, I think what Palantir really does is it allows you to say, hey, let's take some data from over there, mix it in with ours, and then we can like draw some conclusions from that. It's just basically like the way I like to describe what they do is like they're like an Apple for data interoperability. You can just easily take data, combine it with other data sets, use it in their platform, but it doesn't have to be in one place all the time. So, you can stitch together different data sets.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? The Apple for interoperability.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
So, like, how Google basically solved the search problem, right? Like we had the web, and one of the big problems was how do we browse for things on this web, and Google solved that, right? Me personally, I'm not an Apple guy. I don't use Apple products. But a lot of people
I'll just throw this out the window.
A lot of people tell me that they're easy to use. They breathe. People who maybe aren't like so much technically inclined, but who are artists, they just love using Apple products because they're simple and easy to use. Data interoperability historically is a very messy thing. I wrote a previous book about this industry. It's called Semantic Media. But data interoperability is something that technologists have been struggling with since the 80s. They've used this word ontology periodically to describe what it is that they're doing to achieve this interoperability. And there have been different attempts to make it easy for people, from creating standards, creating pieces of software, but nothing really stuck because for proper data interoperability, you need everyone to use the same sort of vocabulary and be labeling their data in the same way to make it interoperable. And there were just too many people who thought they had the way to do that. And so when you have all these folks fighting, it's hard to get it done. Palantir, and this is getting to the point about why they're like the Google or the Apple,
Yeah.
is they've basically created a platform that is easy to do that everyone can use, and probably most importantly, they're getting buy-in from a lot of folks in industry, so more and more people are using their product.
Okay, and so like Apple, their product is also transferable across multiple types of devices, like iPad, MacBook, iPhone, like it all connects.
Devices and industries, right? Like,
Yeah.
so that's why they're not. Although we're going to talk mostly about military, intelligence, policing, defense, their products are used by like the World Food Bank, different airlines use them, car manufacturers, vaccines. Like they're used in many different industries.
Yeah, I guess it does help me understand why Palantir has, like they've just grown massively within the past few years. And it seems like a lot of it has to do with the operability, like you're talking about. And that makes me think about my own addiction to Apple products where I'm like, I already have the MacBook, I have the iPhone. Like, of course, I'm going to get an iPad. I'm not going to get a Google tablet or like an Android tablet. Like, it's so sleek and sexy and like it just I feel that like the product almost like ingrains itself in you.
Yeah.
And like from it sounds like woo to say, but like almost from like a spiritual emotional standpoint, you're like, oh yeah, like Apple understands me. Like this is just so easy.
And that's part of the branding working on you as well, right?
Yeah,
and like
100%. I'm 100% a marketed Apple. Like it's working. It sinks its hooks in.
And Palantir's got a store. You can get T-shirts, hats, hoodies, all branded, Palantir branded stuff. And so they're very conscious of that thing that Apple has, right? Trying to convince people of the brand.
So another aspect that started to change a lot in the early 2000s, along with the post 9/11 change, is the cloud computing. Cloud computing emerged. We had Amazon Web Services, a few other companies that arose alongside AWS. How did that rise of cloud computing sort of intersect with autonomous defense as it's kind of like growing with it?
Well, I mean, if you think about data interoperability and the need to share data, right, across not just departments in one location, but even between companies, or maybe you've got a department in a different geographic location, cloud computing becomes super important, obviously, right? And so cloud computing assists with data integration in that you wouldn't be able to do it if you did not have things like Amazon Web Services or Palantir, who's partnered with Amazon Web Services and other cloud computing providers.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's essential to being able to share data across the internet, across networks. And yeah, it's part of the story for sure.
Yeah, because you couldn't like the massive amounts of data. I guess before cloud computing, I was born in '93, so like I guess I've only really known cloud computing from a device standpoint. But before that, it was all stored locally somewhere, and you had to like go physically get data and upload it and disperse it around. Like so, cloud computing completely changed the game.
Yeah, I mean, previously, if you were doing, ontology stuff or data integration, you'd probably hire some IT person or an engineer who would come basically make you like a bespoke in office, a network where you could like integrate the data. But now you've got these companies like Amazon or Palantir who do cloud computing, who basically, you don't have to have someone come in and build you this like bespoke product where only you can use it, and then nobody else can really use it because it was built just for you. Now we have services that are basically plug and play, and cloud computing is one of them.
Yeah, this is something that blew my mind when I was going through the Palantir papers. You talk about Silicon Valley being built on defense money. I mentioned, I just turned 32 years old. I don't have an association of Silicon Valley outside of apps and social media. Like to me, I'm just like, oh yeah, like it's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Instagram. Like when I think of Silicon Valley, that colors my imagination. How did the link between big tech and defense get buried? Like I'm curious, like how, like why don't I think of big like defense companies when I think of Silicon Valley?
I think when we say buried, it kind of like presupposes like maybe someone was trying to sweep something under the rug.
Yeah, or just like like I guess like societally disassociated. Like
Right.
I know bad actor.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think just the answer is money and what became popular. And what
Yeah.
became popular in the 90s was the web and the internet, right? People love to communicate, people love to talk. And so what was the next big thing to make money on was social media, people talking, and companies realized that they can control all the data and make lots of money off of that data. And that's why, since I was born in 1984, but pretty much even most of my life, Silicon Valley's been associated with social media companies and search engine companies. But their origin, if you think about firms like Intel, Fairchild Semiconductor, they were making parts during World War II for bombs and missiles and things like that. And so, yeah, I think we're just not old enough to remember those times.
It was interesting to go back though to when like the origins of DARPA when I think it was after Sputnik was launched, that's like kind of when DARPA went into overdrive, like in response to the Sputnik satellite. I'm forgetting exactly what the association was in the Palantir papers, but I just remember that being mentioned as a driver of like us competing with Russian technology. That was a signal to the US to be like, all right, we should start investing more in defense.
Well, so the Russians tried to create their own internet, but it failed. So the United States is the one.
When was this?
So I'm not an expert on, but there's a book by somebody named Ben Peters, and the book is called "How Not to Network a Nation," and it's about that history of the Russian internet, but Cold War era, right? It was happening same time that we were building, or DARPA was building. So we should say DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, part of the Department of Defense here in the United States. And in the late 1960s, early 1970s, right? So we're talking like height of the Cold War. Their job was, hey, a nuclear bomb might be dropped in a city and we'll lose everything. So what we need to do is we need a way to distribute information in a network fashion. And that's what got them to start ARPANET, which was, what we know of as the internet today. And so the first nodes were connecting, I think, LA and Utah, somewhere in Utah, Salt Lake City, and then eventually hit the West Coast. That you're right. That was born out of sort of military defense funding, and it was in response to Russia during the Cold War and the threat of nuclear attack.
Do we know how far Russia got with the internet? Like how close were they?
That you'll have to have Ben on the podcast and ask him about that, about how to network a nation.
Yeah, that's so like. I mean, I'm trying to imagine like how different the world would be if the internet came out of Russia, half a century ago, rather than evolve in Silicon Valley and in the West.
I mean, probably what's happening now. Russia has all its own social media sites. Their version of Facebook. China has their version of Google, right? So
yeah.
I mean, if they were the first ones, we would have caught up and eventually built our own stuff.
You mentioned the huge shift from legacy primes. You said that's what the kind of like the old guard for defense, Lockheed, Raytheon. And we have this shift to the venture-backed defense startups like Palantir. What would you say are the biggest differences in how military tech is developed from that old guard to how someone like an Anduril or Palantir develops it now? Like sort of like the pipeline that they use.
So the first thing is, well, what I said earlier is they already make the products. They're not waiting for I mean, they do get contracts and then make products, but primarily, companies like Anduril, they're like, we've got this a variety of products and you need to buy them. Another way that it's different is typically with the old defense primes, a lot of times those contracts take years and years and years to be fulfilled because those companies, once they get the contract, they're not really incentivized to move quickly. They're more incentivized if you've worked with any contractors in your life. I have some at my house right now. They're incentivized to say, this is gonna take a bit longer. We're gonna have to spend another year on this. It's gonna cost a little bit more money.
Yeah, your sink's broken too.
Exactly. Yeah,
that'll be an extra $5,000.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what companies like Palantir and Anduril do is they're not really incentivized in that way. They're like, we've already made these companies using venture seed funding or whatever funding they have, and here they are, and we're going to give them to you, and we're going to move on to the next customer. So it's got that sort of Valley move fast and break things ethos a little bit.
Yeah,
they're different. The one last thing I'll say how they're different is. So I don't know if you read this, but Anduril is opening a facility, an arms manufacturing facility in Ohio. It's going to open next year. It's called Arsenal One,
Mm.
and it's about 5 million square feet. They're going to hire like tens of thousands of people. It's one of the largest. I think I'm right on this. One of the largest sort of weapons armament facilities since like World War II
Mm.
on United States soil. And the reason that they're doing that is that all the products that they make, they want them to be able to be made on U.S. soil by Anduril and using their techniques, and so that they cannot be made by any other company, or any foreign government can't make them in any other location.
Mm.
And they specifically build a lot of these products so that manufacturing facilities, such as like car manufacturing facilities, could be retrofitted to also make these products as well on U.S. soil, which is
Oh,
something
wow.
that happened in World War II as well. So, so making them on U.S. soil, but also making them in a simple enough way that like other facilities in the U.S. could, if they wanted to during wartime, make them as well.
So the plan is to see how this goes in Ohio, and then you could expand
Yeah.
to like a GM facility or something else that does similar sorts of
Yeah,
parts.
in
Yeah.
wartime, or
Yeah.
if the government says
Like
that
ramp
there's
it up.
ramp it up. Yeah.
I get, yeah, that makes sense to have everything made and put together in America, because if you're, if you're making let's say, I saw Anduril just started or they just sold $1 billion of submarines to Australia
Mm-hmm.
for
Ghost Shark
the Ghost
submarines.
Sharks,
Yeah.
the Ghost Fleet. If they're putting that together in other countries and sending the parts here, I imagine you wouldn't want other countries asking questions like, "Hey, what is this making? Like, what are we making again?" They're like, "Don't worry about it. Like, just send us the parts and we'll put it together."
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about the next Great War, right? The next Great War, I think a lot of us know, is going to be sort of like an informational data AI focused war. Time Magazine, when the Russian-Ukraine war started, they said this is the world's first experimental AI battlefield. They called it. There was a cover story,
Mm.
and so with AI and data, you have technology, and countries know that that's disrupting technology, disrupting the internet is one of the ways that you can, weaken the enemy. Look at
Yeah.
what Israel did with the pager attack against Hamas, if you remember that.
Exploding pagers.
Exploding pagers.
Yeah.
Russia cutting undersea submarine cables, things like this. And so, yeah, creating AI weapons that are built in-house, in-country, becomes important in those
Yeah.
contexts.
And yeah, I mean, that seems like a real concern. If, like, we were talking about Apple before, Apple does a lot of manufacturing and parts production overseas. If we ever went to war with China, would they be able to sneak something into an iPhone, and then, that's millions of people at once? Like,
Yeah,
that
and
would be insane.
a
Yeah.
lot of people are conscious of that. I think Apple itself, especially with the current administration, is trying to incentivize companies to bring some of that manufacturing back home. But people like Palmer Luckey, who's in charge of Anduril, creator and founder of Anduril, he's talked about that crisis that Apple is in, because if we do get to that point, some type of like international geopolitical conflict with China, Apple's going to be screwed, because a
Yeah.
lot of their production is happening in China.
Yeah. As a quick side tangent, what do you think about Palmer Luckey? Because I know as much about Anduril as from the talks that I've seen from you online, and then the draft intro of your book, which you were kind enough to send me from like a general standpoint. And then I saw a photo of Palmer Luckey, and he was just like talking about AI defense weapons and like how they could basically fuck shit up, but he's in a Hawaiian t-shirt and sandals, and I'm like, where did this guy come from?
Yeah, and you're forgetting the soul patch
The soul
and the
patch.
mullet,
Yeah,
that he
we'll
has
throw
too.
a nice photo up there
Yeah,
for
he's an interesting guy, and I want to like preface this by saying that like as I'm writing this book, I'm trying to not include sort of ad hominem attacks on these people. I
Mhm.
feel like that gets done enough on
Not smart for a guy who runs AI defense weapon technology.
Yeah, well, that too. But yeah, I feel like a lot of people talk about their personal lives and who these people are. So in my book, I'm going to try to stay away from more kind of like salacious or details about them. But I will say about him. I don't know if your viewers know the backstory, but basically he was the guy that founded
Mm.
Oculus VR, sold it to Facebook at a very young age for billions and billions of dollars, was working at Facebook until roughly 2016, when he was unceremoniously fired by Zuckerberg for basically making a small donation to the Trump campaign.
Really?
I think what he actually did was he paid for like a billboard that like criticized Hillary Clinton, and that got found out at Facebook. It went up the channels, and then he was kind of let go. Which, you know,
For just giving a little bit of money to Trump.
you got to remember what 2016 was like back in those days, especially in
Yeah.
places like the Valley, right? Like you have huge anti-Trump sentiment, you have huge, anyway, just all sorts of sort of ideologies floating around at that time. And he was let go. And you got to give the guy credit. A year or two later, he comes up with this new idea for revolutionizing an industry, move from VR towards autonomous defense.
Yeah.
And the first founder was Peter Thiel. It was the main gave a large led the series of investments for Anduril. And basically, Palmer's clawed his way back up to being the king of another industry, right? He was the VR guy, made billions at a young age, and now he's this. So I kind of admire him. He's a hard guy not to admire, even though I do think he somewhat represents like a Bond supervillain kind of like mentality a little bit.
Yeah, he definitely leans into it though. I respect that.
Yeah,
the look.
The look, he's got a kind of a goofy, cool look, and yeah, he's an interesting guy.
That is crazy though. I had no idea because most people, they will never ascend to the height of a single industry, and he's climbed the ladder of two within years.
That's right,
of
yeah.
each other.
Well,
that's insane.
Well, with a little help from my friend, the song goes, with a little help from his friends, aka Peter Thiel, and billions of dollars. Yeah.
That it is. It's funny though, because like everything, like so much can change in a few years. Because you go back to 2016, Palmer Luckey gets fired from Facebook for donating money to the Trump campaign. The last piece of content I watched, or last long form piece of content I watched with Mark Zuckerberg, was his conversation on Joe Rogan, where he's talking about working with the Trump campaign and saying a lot of things in admiration of Trump and like how he's excited. And that's like 5 to 7 years later. So it's like, what's changing? Did Mark Zuckerberg stay the same, and did the world shift around him, or did Mark Zuckerberg sense the tides are shifting and he now has to like bow to the...
Yeah, the answer is all of these companies are going to just change their tune depending on which administration is currently in power. So that's all you're seeing right now.
Yeah.
Palantir started working with the U.S. government under the all throughout the Obama administration, they were getting contracts as well. So it does not matter who's in government. I think these CEOs are just having a bit more visibility these days because of podcasts, because of social media, et cetera. We just see them kind of like putting on their different hats based on who's in the current administration.
Yeah.
But they've always been like that. And one last thing I'll say is one technique that companies use is typically the way that they'll present themselves is, our founder's a Republican, our current CEO is a Democrat. And then they go and hobnob with those two groups and make donations to those two groups.
Play both sides.
Play both sides. And that's currently what's happening with Anduril. Palmer Luckey is a well-known Republican, and the current CEO is a Democrat, and Palantir the same thing. Karp, I don't know if he says that anymore, but he historically has identified as a Democrat and has donated to Democrat campaigns, and Peter Thiel does Republican.
And Karp is interesting because he seems pretty open about wanting to work with the government, and I know Silicon Valley in the past has basically done all it can to distance itself from government. Like it didn't want to be seen working with Capitol Hill, and Karp's like, no, yeah, like they're our number one customer. Like, of course we're going to work with the government.
Well, there was a void that was perfect for Palantir to fill, right? All the other tech companies didn't want to work with the government. Google declined the Maven contract that the Pentagon had tried to achieve. And Palantir just basically came in and said, we have no problem with this. All you tech companies are too scared to work with the government. We're going to do it. And I think part of the reason other companies didn't is you got to remember what happened with like the Edward Snowden revelations and the NSA, and finding out that, hey, all these tech companies are giving our private data and information to the government.
Everyone's listening all the time.
Everybody's listening all the time. And so that had a knock-on effect, kind of a ripple effect for a lot of companies and their public support of, government services.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to the old defense primes versus the new breed of the private contractors. So you set this up perfectly. You have the defense contractors in the old days who used to bid on the contracts, and then they developed the tech after they won the bid. now you have a new breed of contractor that tries to convince the state to purchase products they've already built. Who's the daddy? Like who's in charge? Is it tech or is it the government? Because if tech is building the products and they're like, hey, you should, buy these drones, buy these subs, buy this software, like who's really driving the decision making?
That's an interesting question. I think to answer it, you just need to look at the money. Like who's got the money. It's so yes, a bit more power with this new iteration of companies is being given to them. They're kind of the ones saying, "Hey, we have these things. We'd like you to buy them." But if you look at money, like the government has so much money from taxes, and they're Palantir's number one customer, Anduril's number one customer. If it wasn't for the government, these people would be out of business, basically. So, if I had to pick a daddy, I'm going to side with Uncle Sam on that one, I think.
They do have the money, but like I'm just imagining if you're someone working in the DoD and you have the ability to sign the checks to buy new technology, and you're sitting in this room full of these crazy, beautiful weapons that you're just like being sort of shown through, like, this is what we have. Like, this is the already built technology and it's all ready. Yes, Uncle Sam has the money, but there's also like a power over being able to just roll out the red carpet for someone and be like, hey, like, all you need to do is sign the check. Like, here it is. Like, go take it. It's yours.
That's to a degree, that's true. I guess we could say that they're the daddy of what the future of warfare is going to look like. In that sense, you're right. Traditionally, the government is relying on these kind of like old primes. And the primes are typically building things that we already know about, F-16 fighter jets, things like that. The future is, Founders Fund, which is one of the biggest, Peter Thiel's investment arm that funds a lot of these companies. The tagline on their website is, what does the future look like? Or tell me what the future looks like. And in a sense, that's what these companies are doing. Anduril is telling the government, this is the future. You need to be developing miniature jets, autonomous jets that can go punch another jet, a manned jet out of the sky, and those types of things.
I saw a video of an autonomous
Roadrunner,
jet.
it's called.
I think it was Roadrunner. Yeah, where it's built to fly in front of the man jets, and it can engage other enemy jets and like have some, like, I think you still need one person watching over it, kind of like a operator, or maybe I'm thinking of the wrong.
Well, a lot
model.
of these systems. So we should tell people when we say that they're autonomous, or we say that they're drones. A lot of these ones that are being produced by Anduril, they're unmanned drones. They're not like the drones we think about where someone has a joystick and they're controlling them. If the one that you're talking about, if it's the one I'm describing, which is called Roadrunner, what they'll do is they'll fly in formation with a manned jet, but they'll already have their mission sort of programmed into them, and they will be acting autonomously as this manned jet is flying around.
Okay, so it has the ability to act on decisions without someone controlling it with a joystick.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is wild.
And it can also land on its own too, kind of like, SpaceX, although this again is just a mini jet, but it can also land by itself.
Yeah, well. That's absolutely insane. That's crazy.
Yeah. Very cool, but also scary.
Very cool and scary. I feel like that's it. That's the tagline of this episode. Cool and scary.
Yeah.
There's something that I noticed as I was preparing for this episode, which is that a lot of people that write about Palantir or make videos about Palantir, they struggle to define what Palantir actually does and what Palantir is. So I want to pitch that question to you, take the pressure off myself.
Sure.
What would you say Palantir is? What do they do?
To me, in a single sort of line, they're a data integration and analysis platform company. So they create a platform specifically for data integration and analysis. Those are things that already existed through various means, sometimes complicated, some not. But unlike some of the historical ways that integration and interoperability were achieved, like we said, they produced a platform that allows people to do that very easily, like a Google, like an Apple sort of situation. And that's what they do. And so a lot of people are scared of things like this because they think that implies surveillance, which in some cases it does. But what a lot of people get wrong about Palantir, and I will give them credit for this, is that there are audit and safety mechanisms built into their products, right? Like, so they can audit who's accessed what data. It's kind of like clearance, like having levels of different clearances. They have that built into their products. Now they'll tell you that that means that their products are safe, that nobody can misuse them. But like a gun, like a nuclear bomb, like anything else, we know that if some nefarious actor or someone who is using them in a bad way wants to use them, they can use them for purposes of surveillance and tracking and kill chains and things like this. Yeah.
Getting into the product side of Palantir, the paper that you put out, the Seer and the Scene, you and your co-author Amelia Acker, you analyzed 155 Palantir patents, and there was also 5,000 or over 5,000 related pages of technical documents along with that. And you guys went through all of these, a shit ton of information. I'm sure very tedious, very methodical, a lot of time-consuming analysis. What did these patents reveal to you about Palantir's motives, their capabilities, and aspirations?
So we did do that paper. My colleague Amelia Acker, she's at Rutgers University now. I just want to say, like, the reason we did that paper, and we may have touched on this earlier, is that a lot of people say a lot of stuff about Palantir, and like, especially on social media, you hear a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got people saying stuff, and without maybe a lot of evidence. And then you have Palantir going out. Sometimes they'll trot out like a PR person, go to like South by Southwest and say, we don't work with ICE, or we don't do surveillance, we don't do this. And so I was just kind of like, let's not listen to either group. Let's ignore, people talking on social media. Let's ignore what Palantir's PR people are putting out. And let's go look at their corporate documents. Let's go look at their 20 years of their patent history. And so that's what we did. So we computationally analyzed, I think it was 5 million words based on the years of their patent history to see what was it that they were developing. And patents are great because often what appear in patents are like speculative scenarios or like drawings and like situations.
Yeah,
where
there are a lot of interesting images for sure.
Yeah, images and like describing what they're used for. And so what we found was, looking at a bunch of them, there are patents about predictive policing. They don't call it that. They call it crime risk forecasting. There's patents about tracking people using everything and literally showing in a network diagram, showing how to track people through their phone calls, banking data, flights that people have taken together. If they used a computer and removed something from the computer and they build it all into this network, showing how to survey someone. Other patents about people's healthcare data. And so what we learned looking through a lot of this material is that surveillance is basically baked into the way that this company has imagined how their product will be used over a 20-year period.
So when you file for a patent, does that have to be based off current capability, or is a lot of it just aspirational in case we do this, we control it?
It's a good question, and it can be both, right? It can be that you've created this awesome thing and you want to have your IP on it. You'll create a patent, but no, a lot of the time it'll be speculative, some design that they've created. But a lot of these patents that we looked at, they started back in we're talking pre 2013 all the way back to 2009.
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff is stuff that we know has been built or was built eventually. Looking at some of the reporting that's come out, I remember seeing an NYPR report about an ICE app that I think Palantir had assisted building. And this reporter was reporting on it because they received one email, one piece of evidence describing this app that ICE was using through a FOIA request.
Mm-hmm.
And we found a patent that describes building this type of app to be able to take a photo with someone and then get all their personal information kind of gathered from multiple databases just by facial recognition, taking a photo of someone.
Yeah.
I can't say that that's the exact app that ICE was using, but we did find an app describing that kind of activity in the data.
Something similar, yeah. I wanted to go back to what you said about not listening to what either side said and digging into the actual data. And the more I've done research for podcasts and just try to be, somewhat of a decent observer of what's going on in the world, the more I've realized how much quotes are unreliable. Like if you follow conflicts or news based on what other people say are involved, and that often becomes the headline of the story. It's like this general said this, or like this CEO said this. And then the actual text of the story is like, yeah, that didn't actually happen though. We're just like walking back the statement. The quote got you to read this, and like, but it's actually not representative of what's going on in this conflict. So yeah, I just want to say like it is really cool that you and your co-author Amelia took the time to go through all of this data, all of this, you know, monotonous data. Like it's a lot of work, and it contributes to the way that people form an opinion about the world, and it's better than just looking at a quote that someone said when they were trying to be salacious in a meeting or something.
Yeah, well, thank you. I do appreciate
Yeah.
that. And like, we're nerdy professors. Unlike, I guess some journalists or like social media, we don't have the same incentives. Like, I'm not looking for clicks, and like, I mean, I am on a podcast right now, but no, our thing is like sorting through data, trying to gather evidence, and those
Yeah.
kinds of things. So yeah,
The crime risk forecasting patent that you mentioned, would it be fair to describe it as predictive policing? Is that
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about that patent.
So basically, in the image and in the patent, it'll show kind of like a dashboard where it literally says, I think the example was from 2014, it'll have a dashboard, kind of like Google Maps showing you London. And it'll say, in the park, person one has like an 80% chance of committing theft at this time in the park. And on the dashboard in the patent, you can cycle through different people, different times of days, different locations, and get different probability scores, like score indicators.
So you could plug in a person. You could
Yeah.
put like you could say, Zach, what's the probability Zach commits a crime
Zach
tomorrow at the park?
Yep. So in this system, it would assume that maybe Zach, you were released from prison maybe like 2 years ago. You moved we're in Philly right now, so you moved into like a Philly neighborhood.
Yeah.
We know that there's 6 other people who were recently released that live in your area. We know that these are the hotspots for crime, and all sorts of other data connecting it. And just like we forecast the weather, making a prediction or a forecast that this person may commit this type of crime on this day in this area based on all the data that we have gathered about them.
And I saw a lot of the patents had these paths, like action paths associated with them. And I forget if this was part of the crime one too, but it was like, I go to work and then I met with this person at lunch, and then the person I met with at lunch met with someone else, and then like that connects back to it. So you have like this whole actionable loop of not just one person, but everyone you're interconnected with who you make contact with ever.
Like think about, like everyone knows what a social network is, right? Like you use Facebook or Instagram, right? And everyone understands the concept of you're friends with someone, you follow someone, you like some of their content, right? That's all tracked, right? We all know that, right? It's all tracked. Basically what Palantir is doing is taking that, but just expand it outside of just a simple social media platform and expand it to the world and reality, right? All the things that you do electronically that can be tracked can be fed into a system, and you can create a social network using all that data. So really, the way you should think about it is like the same way you do stuff on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, and it's all tracked, and you know that yourself, who you interact with. It's doing that, but including things like banking records, credit card data, social media data, information about home purchases, your cars, and just creating a social network using all that data and drawing those connections, like you said.
So you could basically, like, have you ever played around with the Palantir platform? Like, would you have access to that if you're not a customer? Like,
a little bit. I don't want to say too much about that, but a little bit, yeah.
So in as general terms as you can, is it like could I use it as like someone who knows nothing about the software and be able to navigate it?
No. These are complex systems that require some degree of training. I mean, at the same time, it would kind of be like saying, like, if you gave somebody who's never used Google Maps before in their life and you put it in front of them, would they know how to use it? It's kind of difficult to answer. I know my grandfather wouldn't be able to use it.
I would say it depends if they've used other apps.
If they've used other
So
apps.
if someone has used, like, let's say Instagram, where they have done a basic search, maybe they've tracked the location of a friend.
Yeah.
Then I would say yes, they could use Google Maps. But if someone is not app native, then I would say no. And I'm not like autonomous defense native in terms of using these platforms. So I would say probably no.
If you've never done any type of data integration work before, then it would not come intuitively how to use the system and those types of platforms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is a lot of it visual? Like, are you working with a lot of visuals on the platform, or is a lot of it pumped out in like code language?
No, a lot of it is visual. Like we said, they're the kind of, Apple or Google of data integration. A lot of it is visual. They offer pretty sleek sort of data visualization interfaces where you can see what's happening. And this is really important for, especially in the defense industry, the airline industry. You need to be able to kind of visualize all the data. So they have a lot of really good visualizations.
Yeah, like being able to glance at something and have an idea of what's going on at a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
The crime risk forecasting patent, aka predictive policing, you mentioned that this gives you time, location, person. Of course, these are things that have not happened yet. This is predictive. It's percentage based. If this is implemented on a wide scale, are we looking at a Minority Report type future?
That's really what it is, and that's the example I give to people who've maybe not heard of it, but they might have seen the movie. It's pre-crime, right? It's assigning a score to someone, that you think who might commit a crime. We're already there in a way, right? Like Palantir has already been used by the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, the New Orleans Police Department, the New York City police have used it. Currently, they're not. Palantir's mostly expanded with the police work in places like Denmark, Copenhagen, a little bit in Germany, in the European Union. So we're already in that world where police organizations are using these types of technologies.
I went through the Verge investigation that they did back in 2018 with the New Orleans Police Department. And I'll just read an excerpt here from the article so people have an idea. So they write, Palantir has secretly been using New Orleans to test its predictive policing technology. Palantir provided software to a secretive NOPD program that traced people's ties to other gang members, outlined criminal histories, analyzed social media, and predicted the likelihood that individuals would commit violence or become a victim. I'm trying to put myself in Palantir's shoes and like the police officer's shoes, and like if you could predict when something bad is going to happen to a high statistical level, that seems good. But then if you're talking about predicting something like the weather, that is wrong a lot. And even if something's 99% accurate, if you have a million crimes, that's 10,000 or, whatever it is, wrong instances. Like I'm conflicted on how to process that as being the future.
Yeah, I mean, my brother kind of asked me, he likes to play devil's advocate sometimes, so he's asked me that exact same question.
Yeah.
And you're right to talk about the weather, because that's one of the responses I give him is like, when your day at the beach is ruined because of the weather, I mean, you have a day at the beach ruined, right? But if something goes wrong involving predictive policing and your life could be ruined, right? Not just your day at the beach. So it is much more serious. But apart from that, like getting wrongly identified and getting, swept up, think about what it means for like all the people all your associates, right? It's being part of a network where everything has suspicion cast upon it. There have been reports where the police were sent somewhere because the predictive policing model said that there might be a crime. Of course, there wasn't a crime, but they went looking for examples of a crime, right? And so the more and more that you get sent somewhere, the more and more that will feed back into action and kind of create a hotspot where there maybe wasn't a hotspot, right?
Yeah.
And then you start getting things like profiling, et cetera, things like that. So it's bad on a personal level, being misidentified personally, but it also creates these feedback loops for neighborhoods and communities and groups of people where that can just make them a criminal just by virtue of having the police sent out there like, time and again because the model suggested that that's where something is gonna happen.
So the hotspots, I want to get into that because that does seem like a smart, intuitive way to think about it. That if you have a neighborhood where the police are constantly getting fed these high-level predictions of crime, and then they're going to that spot, and then that is creating a feedback loop, a hotspot. Are you just are you just sort of like uh lighting a or you're taking something from like a flame to just lighting a match and just completely incinerating an area
Or
with
you're
crime?
just like, communities get better over time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a low crime, communities are better, but because the data that you've been fed into the machine, you show up there, you look for a problem. When a landscaper looks around, the lawn might look up, but hey, I'll find a weed to, something to do. So cops may find something to do when they're in that area that will just reinforce that loop that keeps happening.
Yeah, you could get sent there and, the software says, "Hey, there's a 90% chance of a stabbing on this corner," and then you don't see a stabbing, but you see a drug deal, and so, like, you just find more things to,
I wish
you know
I wish I had the article in front of me because it was a real
I can,
example, but it
try to
was
look it up if you
yeah,
remember.
we'll see. The details were basically that police were sent out using whatever predictive policing technology. They didn't find what they were looking for, but they did find something like a bike description that they thought like a bike had been stolen, but it ended up not being stolen. And they showed up to these people's house, and then I think was somebody shot or arrested that wasn't even related to the reason that they went out into this community. It was just related to, hey, we happened to see this bike, and then I guess the parents or whoever the guardian at the time was like, "Who are you? Why are you coming in here for this?" And there was some type of altercation that would have never happened if the crime risk forecasting didn't suggest
Yeah.
to go
I
out.
I found something from 2015. Was this a while ago, or was it
It
more
could be. I don't remember
Ba
exactly.
BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit Police using predictive policing to nab bike thieves as thefts spiked 21% nationwide. Uh, using sophisticated sleuthing and tech to try to prevent bike thefts at train stations with so many people riding their bikes on BART. Transit agency officials said there's been a 21% spike. They would guesstimate when the next crime would occur, and then we put undercover police in that place, and they would be waiting. The predictive policing is paying every time they try it. They catch 1 to 3 thieves in the act. We do sting
I
operations, bait
that
bikes.
that sounds interesting. That's
Yeah,
not the one I'm
not
talking
the
about
one.
because
Okay,
it was someone's home.
someone's home.
It
Okay,
involved like a family going to someone's home. Yeah,
okay.
but yeah, but they're out there. If your viewers want to Google them, you can find examples. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I like it. What's the devil's advocate in the other direction? Like if you're a police officer, if you're the head of a precinct and you're trying to reduce crime, what would be the benefit? Like what is a world in which predictive policing reduces overall suffering? Does that world exist?
So
Can you build a case for
you're
that?
looking for the Steelman
Yeah,
argument,
with
is what
Steelman argument.
Steelman
Yeah, yeah,
argument.
Steelman
Yeah.
argument. Yeah, sorry.
Um, y- I guess my answer to that would be that these tools were created from 9/11 and the war on terror, right? These are the kinds of tools that are used to track historically what the U.S. government deems terrorists by saying, "Hey, we've got cell phone data over the past 3 years about this one person. There's an 80% chance this Al Qaeda leader is going to be in this house on this day." And then the military kill chain, they send that information up the chain to whichever general makes the order, and they say, we're 80% sure that this terrorist is in this location on this day. And then there's a decision that is made that we're going to bomb this house on that day because we're 80% sure that this person's there, but they might not be there.
Yeah.
Right? They might not be there. Right? And these are the types of sort of collateral damage and casualties of war that we don't hear about a lot, right? We don't get a lot of those stories, right? If you look at civilian deaths in war scenarios overseas, what happens if all that person's nieces and nephews were there that day? Things like
Yeah.
that, right? So does it work? Yeah, of course it's going to work some of the time. 80% of the time, there's an 80% chance that it can work. If I was in charge of a police department in a place like New York City, and I knew that things were only going to work a certain amount of time, and in other instances there may be grievous harm or death or misidentification, I would opt not to use those services. So I know you asked me, can we imagine a scenario where predictive policing would be good. I really, and I don't say this about a lot of things, but I really and truly think it's kind of like, nuclear arms or nuclear bombs. It is not a good thing to open up into humanity that we should be doing.
I'm on the same page. Like one of the things that I think unites a lot of people who live in New York City, I live in Brooklyn, is how the subway has felt more uneasy than ever, at least in the last 10 years. Like it feels kind of sketchy. It feels more sketchy than in years past. I would love if the incidents on the subway went down selfishly for myself, but just so like other people also did not get hurt when they're traveling on the metro. But I also wouldn't want someone who wasn't causing a problem being walked out of the subway because a program said there was a 40% spike in this person's probability. And like as soon as they swipe their Metro card, a police officer, they do the face scan and then they're like, hey, like that guy's in the red zone. Like he's higher percentage than everyone else. Like you're not taking the subway today. I don't want that to happen at all. So
I'm going to meet you halfway. I'm going to say that I would even maybe agree a little bit that maybe it's okay for public places, not identifying individuals, like in the bike example you just read, to maybe say, hey, we might want to put more cops in this area. That's a public place, not because of any one individual, but maybe that on the train or, in this park, maybe. What I definitely wouldn't say is that it should be used to track people, or that it should be going to specific communities that have certain demographics in a specific community, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if it's the museum, if it's the train, if it's, I don't know, maybe some type of Central Park, something like that. Then,
something that everyone's on.
Then maybe.
Like it's something that it's in the best interest of everyone that lives in the city or the area that like, this is a public good. This should be safe.
I would, as long as there are no scores related to individual people or groups or communities. Then perhaps,
yeah. And I don't think like I mean, I'm luckily I'm not the one in charge of decisions like this because I'm nowhere near smart enough to make that call. But it doesn't seem like there's a way to do predictive policing in an ethical way where you're not removing someone's humanity, because even if you assign someone a percentage, you're now a walking number. And let's say the percentage that I punch someone in the face on the subway is 50%, and I just get like marked at 50%. That means there's also a 50% chance that I'm not gonna punch someone in the face or cause a violent thing. And maybe someone who had a 10% chance, maybe that's their day and they're like, fuck this, I'm gonna knock this guy out on the way to work. Who knows? But like it removes all humanity when you assign someone a number and doesn't give them a chance to, make a decision that would warrant law enforcement getting involved. It's just like kind of cutting you off before you even get to that point, which I don't know.
And you know what to me, one of the worst parts of it all is that all of us, I think humans, I'm going to speak for all of humanity for a second, but like we all love offloading our decisions and our like the less cognition we need to do. Like, like we all started using calculators. We all started using word processors. I'm sure there's some people who use typewriters out there, but like every time there's a new technology where we can kind of just offload a little bit of our decision making and our cognitive load, we tend to use those technologies. It's just kind of how it works. And what I'm scared about as a professor who sees a lot of ChatGPT generated papers that are handed in from students.
I couldn't imagine if I was still in college, the temptation to just plug in everything.
There's a few techniques we use to try to catch those. But the same way that's happening, just think if you're some type of administrator or manager or whomever, and you just have these scores related to people, even though in your heart of heart you might think, it's not good, like you're still going to be incentivized because of time, pressure, money, blah, 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 to say, there's an 80% chance this person's going to do it. Just go get after. Like people are just kind of incentivized in that way, right? We're all kind of like, I don't know, just slaves to, just technology and not wanting to use our brains so much, right?
Yeah.
Not to draw like a Nazi comparison, which I know lots of people do, but like, think about Eichmann in Jerusalem, Hannah Arendt, the banality of evil, right? Evil is not always some big scary monster. It's like just the evil bureaucracy and paperwork that happens sometimes.
Yeah, it could just be
A
some
banal,
boring dude
boring
behind a
who's
desk.
just crunching numbers and pushing
Yeah.
figures. Yeah.
So it's something else you made me think about with the whole predictive policing discussion is like what would be the chain of events? Like let's say you arrest someone before they commit a crime. Now you have someone in custody who hasn't done anything. Do you put that person in jail? Do you just say my bad and like you go home? Do you put them on trial? Like how do you apply law enforcement to someone who has not yet committed a crime worthy of enforcement?
Those are interesting questions that you'll have to ask a legal scholar.
Yeah.
My hunch is that they would wait until
You
something
commit a
happens.
crime.
Well, not that they maybe don't fully do the crime, but try to catch them, like, I don't know, on the way there with a gun or something like that, which cops do all the
Yeah.
time, arresting terrorists, There's a guy named Andrew Ferguson who's written some books about this. You can check him out.
Yeah.
You might have a better answer. He's a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a really interesting thing that you wrote in the Palantir files. I kind of see these as paired, like the seer and the seen and the Palantir files, and I'll link both of those sources wherever people are watching this. You point out this contradiction, and it's that Palantir says it protects privacy while simultaneously admitting private tech shouldn't perform government functions without accountability. So that begs the question, like, how do you operate in privacy and then also be held accountable?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think Karp said something similar. May have even been quoting him at the time, but I think we're in an era where there isn't enough regulation around AI, right?
Yeah.
And part of the reason we have that, some of your viewers may or may not know, the Biden administration tried to create a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which had all these kind of like ethics and recommendations and policy things built into it. They released an executive order, and the current Trump administration basically, got rid of them, made their own executive order, which is basically like, we're not going to do any regulation or any laws related to AI.
Yeah.
It literally says that on their AI action plan. The first section is about get rid of all the regulations related to AI. Well, how does that relate to what you just said about Palantir, right? Like how can we have an unelected firm performing government functions, especially if it involves things like privacy, et cetera, is that we need law and policy to tell these firms how they should operate and what they can or cannot do. And to Palantir's credit, I think that's exactly how they feel too. Companies like Palantir and a lot of tech companies are like, just tell us what the law is, what the regulation, and we'll try to follow it. But where it doesn't exist, naturally, there's going to be overreach. There are going to be some scary scenarios that happen, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Ontology is a big buzzword with Palantir. What is ontology when it comes to Palantir? This is another one of those, like, what is Palantir? What is ontology?
Ontology comes from philosophy. I mean, I have to give that definition first before we talk about Palantir and data interoperability. Yeah. Ontology is just like what exists and how can you give evidence for what you believe exists, and like what type of commitments to entities do you believe in to allow you to say that this is a bottle of water, this sits here. So philosophers have been doing this for a long time, right? Like since Aristotle.
And I'm asking you to explain it in 30 seconds on the podcast. Yeah. Like conversation has been going on for thousands of years.
But really, all you need to know, instead of thousands of years of philosophy, is the ability to say that this thing exists and it has relations to other things, and I can map those out using logic, let's say, right? Funnily enough, in computer science around the late 80s, early 90s, they also started using the language of ontology for how they label data and information, right? Actually, young people today might not remember, but you can save files with a particular name, right? Or have some metadata related to a file. Yeah. So in data systems and data science and interoperability, they've historically used the word ontology to describe do we have any type of organized way that we're going to label all this data that we have in our company or whatever, our competitors' data? And what you saw throughout the late 80s, early 90s is all sorts of ontologies for labeling data started coming out. I can even name some of them. There's the basic formal ontology, the suggested upper merged ontology, and there's more, Doce, all types of ontologies, Dublin Core, etc., that have been saying, hey, we know the way that we should label data in this industry or overall. But like we said earlier, the problem with that is you cannot have a bunch of different people saying we have the way to organize data and to label data.
Yeah.
Palantir has come along and said we've built a system and just everybody needs to use this system and the way that we label things and that we identify things, and then all your data can be connected and it can sing together in one place using one system. And that's attractive because prior to Palantir, there was not one platform or one system, and they've provided the one platform and system that does that successfully.
So ontology gives meaning to raw data.
Yeah.
You're essentially giving labels to it that are universal language.
Yeah, and not just the label for the data entity. What an ontology does is it also describes the relationships that data item has with other data items in the system. So it's like, say there's a photo about, Andrew Iliadis photo, right? That'll be saved in there, but then it'll also be tied to other information about me that you can easily map all the relationships related to that, to that photo. So it's about naming entities, but also describing the relationships between data entities as well. That's what ontology means in like computer science. And truly, it's kind of like a social network. If you've ever seen like a social graph before, if anybody's ever downloaded like their Facebook social network, like we used to do back in the day, it's like that. It's identifying entities and their relationships and describing the relationships between them.
So would I be correct to say an example of that would be, let's say Zach is just raw data, like Zach at the corner on 2 p.m. The ontology might be threat applied to Zach, like I am a threat and brother. Like I'm just trying to understand what the ontology part of it would be outside of the data.
The ontology is the underlying structure.
Okay.
Right? It's not the ontologies can be used to infer and make predictions about things, right?
Okay.
Like if you say you're like a shipping magnate and you want to know where all your ships are on Earth, right? And so you've got a nice ontology with all your ships and what seas they're in, but you also in your ontology have weather data. You also have legal data, etc. Right? If you've got that all ontologized into your system, right? Kind of in this network, you can then query that system to say, what's the best route for my ship to take, given that you now have all of this weather data, legal data about shipping lanes, where other ships are. Tell me what's the best place to send my ship. And what the ontology will hypothetically do in a system like Palantir will say, this is the best way that you should send your ship based on all the different data items that I have. According to this legal system about offshore vessels, in whatever American Samoa, it'll give you information.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the ontology, it gives meaning, and then it's also connecting the relationships to everything else. And then you can play around and shift that ontology with your own desires and goals, and it'll kind of like give you an output.
You can ask it to make actionable decisions for you for forecasting, but they will have percentages associated with them, just like the crime risk forecasting, right?
Yeah.
But there's to me less risk of saying I want to send my ship this way than go arrest whomever on the
Okay, that makes more sense. So something that Palantir has on its website and something that Alex Karp says a lot is we are not a data company. To me, based on what you said about ontology, this seems kind of shifty because it's like saying we're not a gun company, but we decide what's worth shooting. Like you're technically you're not making guns, or you're not manufacturing weapons, but like you're controlling the language of how the weapons are applied. So technically he's right, but I feel like being an ontology company is more powerful than being a data company.
Yeah.
It's like a misdirect.
It's so there's two things going on when he says that, and I know exactly what you mean when he says that. So the first thing is when he says that they're not a data company, he's talking in the sense of like a Google or a Facebook and the way that they buy and sell people's data. Like that's what he means. Is like we're not a data company in the sense that we're literally selling data about Anduril Iliadis to a marketing company to sell him ads when he's on the internet. That's really what they mean. Is like we're not buying and selling individual people's personal data. And in that respect, he's probably right. Right? Their main way that they make money is not by gathering data about people who use the internet and then selling it to an advertising agency or like a marketing firm. Right? And so that's what he means when he says we're not a data company. We don't steal people's data. It's not built into their model the same way. But where he is conceivably wrong is that if you look at how their customers are going to use the Palantir product, which include things like government agencies, police departments, companies themselves, they can choose to use the data, people's personal data in any which way they want, right? So in a way, maybe what you said is right, that it's more valuable to be the seller of the what's the expression? Like in a gold rush, sell shovels. Something like that.
Fools rush gold. Like smart people sell shovels.
Yeah, in a gold rush, sell shovels. I think in that way, I think Palantir, truly the way that Google identified a market niche for themselves, Facebook identified a market niche for themselves. Not that no other company was doing those things, but they just were the right place, right time. Palantir is doing that for ontologizing data points in reality and allowing people to make decisions. And in that sense, yeah, they're not buying and selling people's social media data, but they're allowing new types of data privacy questions and problems to emerge, right? And this is what we all have to ask ourselves in an era where we don't have AI regulations and law right now at all. Right?
I mean, because they're defining reality in a way for their customers. They're shaping the way their customers see reality, who is suspicious, who to detain, who is safe, who to kill. Like, it does seem like that is the real power, not accumulating data to sell. Like that almost seems old school now. The real power is selling your platform to the most powerful organizations in the world, which are state governments, and then having them be like, hey, like this is what this all means. Like their Palantir companies like that are driving the decision making through the Ontology platform that they're giving their data. So when they plug in what's the safest route or who's the biggest threat, that comes together and gives them an answer, and they trust that answer.
Yeah. I will say though, because I want to maybe take back a little bit that I said, there have been questions about how long Palantir has access to data once someone ceases to be a customer, one of their customers. So the New York Police Department, I believe, took Palantir to court because Palantir was not giving them their analytics data when they no longer had a contract with Palantir. And so there are certainly questions about data retention. What does Palantir do with the data when nobody's a customer anymore in their systems, in their cloud systems, and all sorts of other problems. So there are some issues with how Palantir handles data related to its customers. Yeah.
If I'm Palantir from a pure power and market control standpoint, I have all of these customers, and now they have international customers, but all of these different government agencies from like DOD to HHS to Doge, and they were Trump tapped Palantir to basically make like this centralized database for Americans. If I'm Palantir, I'm making a copy or keeping that data to have like a master ontology of the world, essentially, and using that in the background to make decisions.
Well, unfortunately, we don't know. We just don't know because these are black box technology. it's kind of analogous to if you think about LLMs right now, right? Like if you think about ChatGPT and Claude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we think they're these magic things, blah, blah, blah. But now there's all these court cases where like the New York Times is taking them to court because they've illegally, used their articles as training data for the model, right?
Yeah.
So if we know that, and Google, once upon a time for Google Books, basically was illegally ignoring the copyright and like taking all the books that had been scanned at Harvard and other libraries to make that. So if we look at history, if we look at the way Google has treated people's data, if we look at the way LLM companies have been stealing people's information, and if you want to scratch your chin and ask yourself, does Palantir have a secret database where they've kept stuff to create an ontology? There's not evidence of that right now, but that's why we need more transparency, more laws, more policy, more regulation around
more
this.
people like yourself going through patents and looking at the stuff that no one else is willing to put in the time to look at.
Yeah.
Here's a big question. When you have a private company like Palantir that is shaping the ontology of government databases, those are your customers, and the government is acting on it. Palantir is an unelected company. Is that bypassing democracy? If that is the future of government decision making, we have unelected private companies controlling decision making. Can we say we even live in a democracy anymore if that becomes the primary process?
That's the question, I think, right? Can a private unelected firm be performing government functions? I think it's kind of like a scale. I don't think it's like a yes/no question. I think so. I'm going to give a boring answer and say it's kind of, if you think about scales, right? So think about all the decisions that government makes, right? There's billions of decisions that different different agencies use, right? At what stage where we offload all these decisions can we say that a government is still running, or a software firm that enables those decisions to be made through giving some type of forecasting or percentage or what have you, right?
Yeah.
So like where's the threshold? Where's the cutoff line? What's the critical point where we say, hey, too much of the government has been offloaded to this software company making decisions versus having people at the helm, elected people at the helm to make a decision.
It's like, when do a bunch of grains of sand become a pile? Like, what's like the crossover point? And can we stop? Like, will we hit a point of no return?
Or Theseus's ship, or whatever other example you want to use, right? Like, when does it stop being the government, and when does it start being a corporation that's fulfilling these functions? Banks use this kind of software all the time to determine whether somebody should get a loan or not, right? Police departments are using it. We know the Department of Defense uses it. And now with Doge, right, you referenced some of the Wired reporting, which I think they should win a Pulitzer for the reporting that they did during the Musk-Doge takeover of the U.S. government. Palantir was involved in that, creating you also referenced the New York Times piece with some of the Palantir whistleblowers describing this centralized database being created. There are laws that are supposed to protect U.S. citizens from having their data be integrated from different data sources. There are laws that say if your data was collected for this one purpose, that's not allowed to be mixed with this other set of data. So if you look at this type of mixing that's happening, right, and which really has no other function other than like this tech company has enabled the government to be able to do it. And if you have a company like Palantir slowly encroaching on all the different functions of government, we have to just ask ourselves, when do we stop having a government, and when is a government by a technocrat or a tech agency?
Yeah, like when's that breaking point? When does it change? I guess that's still something to be seen. There's a line in one of the patents from The Seer and the Scene that you pulled out. This could be absolutely nothing. I just thought this was an interesting line, and I'll give you my take on it. And you could tell me if it's complete bullshit. The line is, the recipient of the original master ontology may know to stop working on their version in the sandbox. So the way that I took that is like, if an individual is doing analysis, if the master ontology gets essentially handed down to them, like, no, this is what that means, the individual the master ontology overrides any individual analysis. So it's like, we don't care about you playing in the sandbox anymore. Like, the master ontology has been given to you. Like, stop doing your work. Like,
that could be
does
what
that-
it means. I'm having trouble recall. Actually, I'm having trouble recalling.
it was
that
a weird
exact-
line. As I'm scrolling through it, I was just like, huh, like that's weird.
We
shit.
did look at over like 50 million words and 5,000 pages.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to
Obviously,
picture that.
I don't
that
expect you
exact
to
one, yeah.
recall that, but I'll throw it up like the screenshot
Sure.
on the screen for people
Yeah.
watching it. But I just remember I'm scrolling through it and I'm like, that seems weird as shit. Like the master ontology or the recipient of the master ontology may know to stop working on their version in the sandbox.
Yeah, it sounds like it's so sandbox typically is when you're like kind of experimenting and playing around in a safe environment with data, right? And then you get some instruction that says you don't need to do that anymore because we've found a better way to do it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I took it as. Like I'm an individual analyst in, insert X field, could be homeland security, vaccines, defense, like whatever. And then I'm working on a problem and all of a sudden like I get handed the master ontology and that overrides any of my analysis. It's just like, yeah, you're done now. Like this is what it means.
Yeah. That sounds about right to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to get into, you mentioned before the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yeah.
There's an article from Time magazine that how tech giants turned Ukraine into an AI war lab.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm going to read an excerpt from that. I want to get your thoughts on this. So it reads, "The progress has been striking. In the year and a half since Karp's initial meeting with Zelensky, Palantir has embedded itself in the day-to-day work of a wartime foreign government in an unprecedented way. More than half a dozen Ukrainian agencies, including its ministries of defense, economy, and education, are using the company's products. Palantir's software, which uses AI to analyze satellite imagery, open source data, drone footage, and reports from the ground to present commanders with military options, is, quote, responsible for most of the targeting in Ukraine, according to Karp. Ukrainian officials told me they are using the company's data analytics for projects that go far beyond battlefield intelligence, including collecting evidence of war crimes, clearing landmines, resettling displaced refugees, and rooting out corruption. Palantir was so keen to showcase its capabilities that it provided them to Ukraine for free of charge." What are your general thoughts, like things that jump into your head when you see Ukraine basically being an experiment for AI weapons, an AI war lab, as Time magazine puts it?
Well, a couple of things, and yeah, we referenced that piece a little earlier in the discussion. Number one, battlefields have always been labs for technology in war, right? If you look at what happened in every conflict, it's where new technologies are showcased. From the atom bomb to mustard gas to all sorts of scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So battlefields have always been a place where new weapons and techniques have been shown. So that's not new per se. I think what could be a little new is the kind of salesmanship that one gets from these kind of startup companies because they have that kind of like move fast and break things ethos. There's a little bit of salesmanship involved in it that I think is a bit different than of years past, right? I don't think we saw the president of Intel like going to a foreign land saying like, hey, so we're killing it out here and it's helping with everything. So
yeah, like using corporate terminology for AI weapons in war,
death and destruction. I think so that kind of smells to me a little bit. I would say that's different. My book, which I don't know if I'm going to keep these two sort of descriptions at the beginning, but I put a quote, one from Karp's book, The Technological Republic, that he co-wrote, talking about, we need to build AI weapons for the next century of warfare. But the other quote that I put is from a little-known book called The Merchants of Death, which is about selling, selling arms to all sides during a war. And I think that quote from Merchants of Death, the way that it ends is like, it's a very antisocial thing to be selling to be marketing arms in like periods of war. Like you're basically an antisocial person if you're doing that, going out and like selling it. And that's why I put those two quotes together, because I was like, that's how Karp and some of these tech companies seem to me in periods of conflict. They're the first ones to go out there to try to shake hands and get a photo op and say our stuff is being used out here and everybody should be using it.
And like, I guess to their credit with what they're trying to build, like, when you take the line, we're collecting evidence of war crimes, clearing landmines, and resettling refugees, if you're able to do that at a wider and faster pace, that's an amazing capability to have mid-war. But then when they say Palantir was so keen to showcase its abilities that it provided them free of charge, immediately I'm like, this is bullshit. Like,
Well, and
they're
that
not doing this out of the kindness of their hearts, because you need to train AI weapons, you need active conflict, and they're
yes.
taking advantage of an active war to be like, hey, let's see what our shit can do. Like,
Yeah.
let's throw it in there. We're getting something out of it. We're getting a lot out of this. Palantir is. They're not just doing this out of the kindness of their hearts.
No, it's like the shock doctrine, right? Crises are great opportunities to make money, no matter what field you're in, right?
Yeah.
And so these companies benefit from things like that. Is it good? Yeah, of course it's good to clean up mines and to help the Ukraine. But the marketing part is not great. The giving the product for free is not great because it's a good, I guess, photo op, that type of opportunity. And I'll pitch this. Right? Like Palantir and Carp often say, like, we're on the side of the West. We work with Western companies and we have the values of the West, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also been reporting that they're like working with Saudi Arabia a little bit and like other governments right now. But put that aside. Look at the example, and we haven't talked a lot about SpaceX. I don't know if we'll have time to, which I do write about in the book. But think about the reporting that happened recently. So Musk runs SpaceX. SpaceX is in charge of Starlink. Starlink is also being used in conflicts around the world, right? Didn't Musk turn Starlink off during the Ukraine-Russia conflict? There was a period, I think, last year where he basically turned it off, and then all of a sudden, Ukrainian troops didn't have access to all the analytics data that they had about where ships are. Why did he make that decision? I don't know. We'll never know. So I would say this with respect to Palantir, things change all the time, and a corporation isn't as wedded to a certain moral outcome or a certain outcome than a country is, or the people of a country, right? So what happens if the president or CEO of that tech firm is incentivized to do the opposite, right? I mean, we got to remember these are for-profit entities. They're not people who have voted them into existence. So if your incentive structure can change, then I would not trust a company with all of that.
Well, let's get into SpaceX to switch it up a little bit. What is SpaceX's role in autonomous defense?
SpaceX is some people might not know this because people just think about the rocket ships and things, but they are the number one AI military contractor with the United States government.
Really?
Yeah, more than Palantir, more than Anduril.
Wow.
SpaceX receives the most money in terms of contracts with the United States government that come from places like the Department of Defense and things like this. Again, people don't really know much about it.
What's the product that?
So I'll mention that. I'll just quickly say those two nonprofit groups that I mentioned earlier. So the Silicon Valley Defense Group, they released their NatSec 100. This is the 100 AI startups that are most valuable, that are working in this industry. And for several years running, or since they started 3 years ago, SpaceX has been in the number one position. So what are they selling? Comms, right? Comms, internet. A lot of the work that they do is top secret. We hear even less about the work that SpaceX does with the United States government than we do about Palantir and Anduril. But largely what they're assisting with is comms. So like just setting up secure networks, internet networks. They also help bring missiles to space. So there are many missiles that they've brought up there. And if you think about the next generation of warfare, a lot of people talk about space as like the next frontier of warfare. Currently, that's what SpaceX is involved in. And that's the difficulty. We don't have transparency. A lot of this stuff is classified. A lot of it is, under secrecy. But what we do know is that they're assisting with comms. They're assisting with bringing missiles to space. And as in terms of contracts, they receive the most money from defense organizations.
So does that mean if the products are classified by SpaceX, does that mean the patents are also classified? Like you wouldn't be able to do what you did with SpaceX with Palantir, like when you went through the 155 patents?
It's going to be, I haven't actually done an analysis of SpaceX patents yet. I think it would be different because Palantir, remember, like we said earlier, was born in the era of 9/11 and counterterrorism. So naturally, when they were developing patents around data integration, the examples that they were giving were kind of related to surveillance and that. I could be wrong, but I don't think when SpaceX started, the mission or the goal was let's help the United States government bring missiles into space.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that I would find examples like that in the patent history, but it could be possible. I'm just not sure yet.
Yeah. So you mentioned the comms. So obviously the Starlink is the public one. Star Shield is the one that's kind of top secret. Like we don't really know too much. What is available that we know about it? Because I know it's being used in Russia, Ukraine, you said. I think also in Israel as well, Israel, Gaza. Like, what do we know about Star Shield and its capabilities?
It's a top secret program, but we don't know a lot about it. This is actually the section of the book that I've yet to write, so I'm not. I've less.
We're writing it in real time.
Writing it in real time, yeah. But truly, we don't know enough about it. There's things I can say, but since I am still writing the book, I also want to be conscious of like jeopardizing my sources and like people I talk to and things like that. Yeah, a lot of it is comms related. I would say, here's what I would say. I would say we need to hear from more whistleblowers is what I would say. That big New York Times article that came out about Palantir assisting the administration build this centralized database, that article was based on a letter signed by, I believe, six or eight whistleblowers that had formerly worked at Palantir. And that's how we get that reporting out. And I think that's what we need in these industries that are not regulated. We need more whistleblowers to come forward to kind of, maybe break a non-disclosure, agreement and tell us what's been happening. But yeah, there's not too much more I can say about the SpaceX stuff other than top secret that you mentioned with the comms and bringing missiles to space.
It does beg a really big general question that if space is the next frontier of autonomous defense, which it looks like it's going to be, and that tech is controlled by one or a few companies, what does that mean for the future on Earth as being autonomous individuals, but also from a governance standpoint? Who's going to govern what SpaceX does in space from like a weapons AI standpoint that could that affects the entire globe? Like, I don't even know how that would work.
We need we do have international bodies that are supposed to assist with times of war and things like this, and maybe there needs to be one for space. The same way we have NATO and other organizations. We need to think about like, what do we do about the space issue, the space problem. These are things we need to think about. But the answer is always boring. I was contacted by a reporter who was like, "Don't you think Palantir is evil?" And she kept trying to ask me these like gotcha questions, and I was like, "No, I have a pretty boring answer for you, and it's that we need more law and policy and regulation related to this company, right? It's not that so and so is evil; it's that these are like real issues." And the same is true of space. Like we need international agreement about what types of standards and laws that we should be setting related to this. I'm not a space expert, so someone might be able to speak more on that than I can. But yeah, we need international agreement and laws, and we need different companies and countries to agree to them.
Yeah, I'm just thinking big picture. If we have this autonomous defense weapon system surrounding Earth in the future, and let's say we do come into contact with other beings, do we really want one individual like Elon Musk having autonomy over how we communicate with other people, where, you would want like the top minds in the world figuring out problems like that and having input, and not just like one person who happened to build the company that took over the world.
I think you're right. And I think like, if you think about the way countries can be run, right? We have extremes. There's like socialism where you can be like a dictator. I think in the end, whether it's a company or a country, it's never good when there's like either a monopoly or a monarch. When it's like complete control by one individual in charge of all aspects, it's not very good. That's why we have antitrust laws against companies, and it's not really good. That's why we've fought several wars related to dictators who rule by fiat, instead of a democracy. And I think those extremes can be found in corporations and in countries, and neither one of them are good.
I do want to, as we start to end off, I want to get into Anduril as well, because I think they're a super interesting company. We mentioned Palmer Luckey.
Mm-hmm.
What does Anduril do, and how do they differ from Palantir?
So the way that you can think about it is kind of like, and this is a really rough characterization, but like Palantir is kind of like the intelligence, software, decision making, forecasting, predicting. That's them. Anduril, again, a simplistic way to think about it, but they're the ones making kind of like the hardware, the killer submarines, drones, robots. They do have their own software. It's called Lattice that they use. But if I had to be reductive, I would say Palantir is the kind of software that helps you with your predicting and forecasting, and Anduril is helping make the tools and weapons.
Those Ghost Shark submarines are insane.
They're pretty cool.
They're very cool.
Yeah.
Like, to be able to have an unmanned fleet, like
circling Australia,
but then that's paired with the unmanned jets, and then you have drone. Like, I'm just thinking about the future of warfare. You're gonna essentially have entire battlefield ecosystems that run themselves. Like, that at that point, like, what does war even mean? It's just like sending a bunch of unmanned shit at each other and seeing what shakes. I guess
it's kind of like who has the most money and resources, and who can pay for the most wins, I guess.
Yeah. Anduril does differentiate itself from other weapons companies, which you introduce in the draft of your book, which is that they pursue the government pretty aggressively to convince them to buy its products. We talked about that a little bit with Palantir in the beginning. With Anduril, when you're talking about like the actual hardware, like drones, subs, jets, is that a dangerous dynamic to have for the future? I don't want to say like evil, because like, well, I don't want to sign them around, but like, it does seem that like that could get dangerous.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. Your product line are weapons that kill people, and you're a for-profit company. I don't know, fill in the gap. Not you personally, but like, just think about it, right? Apple wants to sell a lot of cell phones. That's good for their business.
No.
Right? Anduril's business is creating killer autonomous robots. So what's good for their business? War is good for their business. It's kind of as simple as that. So is it a moral question? Is it unethical? I would say that in times of peace, I'm not sure that there's a need, and I mean like global international peace, not like proxy wars or like smaller things, but like there's no great power war right now, right? There's no China, Russia, U.S.,
not yet,
North America war, not yet. And Anduril would say something like, well, there might be, and that to maintain order, we need to stockpile to be able to deter the threat from another country, right? But we kind of already went through this story, right? We went through this story with the nuclear arms race, right? And we scaled that back because we learned that if we keep manufacturing these bombs, it's going to lead to a disaster for humanity. And so we've decreased the amount of nuclear arms that exist on Earth because countries came to an agreement that this is not something that we should keep doing to maintain the peace. Yeah. And I think that can be true of autonomous AI weapons as well. How is this any different that we need to, I think the phrase he likes to use is prickly porcupine, and some other people repeated it that I've interviewed in my book. But I'm just not convinced that the idea is that, speak softly, carry a bigger stick was like, the famous expression, but like, I'm not sure that that's true. I'm not sure that that's what maintains peace, global peace, I think global peace has been achieved through all the international agreements that we've been able to achieve, whether it's like economic, policy, law, like that's what brings peace, diplomacy, not manufacturing arms.
The prickly porcupine metaphor, you write about that in the intro to your book. That was the example where it's like, if South Korea has weapons, they want North Korea to know, like, if they attack, they'll essentially get stung back.
Yeah.
Another way of saying carry a big stick and,
speak softly, carry a big stick. But, again, going back to the nuclear example, like we've already done, this story has already happened before. And humanity and the world agreed we need fewer of these things. and that's how
Yeah.
we should proceed. Yeah.
So, something I can't wrap my head around is, or at least see this ending in a way that's beneficial for society, is the fact that in order to train these AI weapons and software, you need active conflict. There's no other way to train them well.
Mm-hmm.
From an incentive standpoint, you, as a CEO of a company like Palantir or Anduril, you may not come out and say that, like, we need another war. We need to, like, incite some conflicts because we got some shit in the pipeline we need to test. But you might, like, indirectly push things to an unstable level, or put pressure on government, or do things like, I believe people act in line with incentives. If you incentivize someone a certain way, they're probably going to act that way. So if you're incentivized where your profit relies on conflict, I don't see how that ends well.
How does it? I mean, it's an existential threat for your company, and the CEO's job is to, especially a publicly traded company like Palantir, whose PE ratio is super high right now, but that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, your incentive is to make money. So I think you're right about that. I think, like, what's the incentive?
What does democratic oversight of a company like Palantir or Anduril or Star Shield look like? How do you even begin to have democratic oversight?
You need organizations in government whose job it is to basically regulate and to, like, check in on these companies. But what we have over the last several years is the increasing sort of deregulation of um, government, reducing the amount of bodies that exist that are able to hold companies sort of feet to the fire should something go wrong. And that's the exact opposite of what we need right now. We need organizations in the government to be able to say, hey, we're going to come check on you. We're going to look at your privacy impact assessments. We're going to look at your environmental impact assessments, et cetera. More regulation, not less, especially given that we're in this new era, AI era in warfare.
There is a French philosopher, Paul Virilio.
Yes, I'm aware. Yes.
The concept of dromology.
Uh-huh.
I just learned about this researching for this episode, but for people who aren't familiar, dromology is the study of speed, and essentially whoever moves the fastest gets to be in charge of society, warfare, politics. Would you say that's a fair definition?
Mm-hmm.
You can add to it if you want.
We'll say yes. Yeah.
Paul Virilio talks about this thing called the tyranny of time, where everything kind of, like, collapses in on itself from speed, and innovation starts to legitimize itself, where it's like, of course we're going to do this because it's the next step. And my question to you is, like, have we reached a point of no return where Palantir and its peers are moving so fast and moving with such speed that law and politics are just optics? Like, they have figured out a way to supersede law and democracy to the point where democracy will eventually be a slow spectator and not the driver of government decision making.
It's a good question. It's a big question. I'm trying to think of an answer for you now off the top of my head. So I admire Paul Virilio. I've read some of his work. I've done some work in French philosophy, and I like this idea. It seems intuitive to me, right? You get so fast that you kind of these other things become outmoded because the speed is the thing, right? In a way that can be true, right? If you think about industry, but I'm always hesitant reducing things to sort of one element. It's why I'm not a big fan of, like, the guns, germs, and steel argument of, like, history and how evolution happens, right? Based on these, like, three things.
Yeah.
I think there's always an X factor. There are always things that we don't consider that can happen. I do think, though, that Virilio is probably right. And in the context of Palantir and Anduril, we certainly seem to be heading in the direction where something like corporate statehood is going to happen. We haven't talked yet about the network state idea, right? This idea of, like, a corporation basically running a city or a country, and these exist currently, right? In the world, there are these projects and experiments happening related to that. It certainly seems like that's where we're heading. I don't know, though, that democratic politics will be completely eroded from that. I think, if anything, we're going to see a mixture of those two different forms of governing happening at the same time. So it'll be a question of like maybe there's going to be this bifurcation where there'll be certain cities, possibly even a country one day, where it's corporate control versus a democratically elected control. But it certainly won't eclipse it. Probably not in the next 100 to 200 years. I don't think so.
Do you mean like you could choose to live, let's say, like in Palantir land versus the United States or Anduril? Like the corporate entity will have control over it.
And those already exist, like currently.
Where is that?
Do your quick Google, because I don't have my Google in front of me here. It's in South America. I want to say it's either Honduras but just say basically like a corporate city, basically.
Corporate city.
Yeah, in South America. I wish I had it in front of me here, but I don't.
South America.
So basically it's a bunch of it's a CEO that basically runs the city and the experiment, and it's not like a democratically elected.
Let me see. Buenos Aires came up. I'm guessing that's not the corporate city.
And there's other examples like seasteading, like floating countries run by
Prospera.
That's it.
Wealth fund manager Eric Bremen, a Venezuelan, created the idea of Prospera, and a CEO, along with being the CEO of Niue Capital.
That's it. So Prospera currently exists. You can go there, and it's run, but it is not a democratically elected place. But there's a lot of innovation happening there. There's a lot of tech innovation. There's a lot of good jobs. They give free education to the people who live there. But it's an opt-in society. It's a society where you decide, hey, I want to basically live in a corporation that runs my world and my reality versus elected officials.
Do you know how the experiment is going so far?
There was an episode of, I want to say Yes. Did you know the YouTube channel Yes Theory?
Yes.
They did an episode. They did an
Yes, I do.
They did an episode there in the past couple of years, and so check that out if anybody wants to see.
I'll give that a watch.
Yeah.
You mentioned the guns, germs, and steel, and something popped into my head.
Yeah.
Whereas, you're saying like there's probably other factors involved. What do you think is the biggest factor that people aren't considering right now that will dictate the future of autonomous defense?
The biggest factor that people aren't considering right now that will dictate the future of autonomous defense. I think that there's and I'm not just saying this because I think these technologies are dangerous. I think that people underestimate in this industry how much people will be against these technologies in this movement, not just in the battlefield and the countries that are at war, but by the sort of international community writ large.
Hey guys, unfortunately the studio I paid a ton of money to record this episode at lost the last few minutes of this conversation with Andrew, so I'll try to summarize from memory how things ended. I asked Andrew Iliadis what he believes is the biggest factor people aren't considering right now that will dictate the future of autonomous defense. He started to explain that people will underestimate just how much the international community will push back against AI weapons on battlefields and the broader move towards autonomous defense systems. What scared him most wasn't a sudden sci-fi catastrophe, but how quietly this technology is being normalized through procurement contracts, technical standards, and bureaucratic decision-making before the public fully understands what's at stake. And when it comes to what actually shapes the future, he argued that it won't just be technical capability. It'll be treaties, norms, diplomatic pressure, and public backlash from states that fear escalation, loss of sovereignty, and destabilizing deterrence. In short, not everything that can be built will ultimately be allowed to exist. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.